Hi and welcome to the Seam Circle. My name is Kat. Today we are going to make the Iris Drawstring Camisole top. This video accompanies the pattern that I'm selling on my Etsy page, and I would say that this sewing project is for beginner to intermediate sewers. In today's video, you will learn how to line a top, but you'll also learn how to make a drawstring casing. Both of these are skills that you'll get to use down the track in many other sewing projects. I would say that most light to mid-weight woven fabrics are good for this sewing pattern. Today, I'm going to be using an embroidered cotton. So without further ado, let's get into the tutorial. For this tutorial, you will need your seam circle sewing pattern, your main fabric, your lining fabric, your sewing machine, some sewing supplies, of course, and an iron and an overlocker could come in handy, but if you don't have them, you can definitely get away without them. Okay, the very first step to making your drawstring camisole is to print out and assemble your pattern pieces. If you're yet to do this or don't know how to, I actually have made a video explaining in depth on how you can put your pattern pieces together for the seam circle. So I'll leave a link to that video in the description. This top is made up of 3 pattern pieces. So we've got the front, the back, and the tie. And because the top is lined, we have to consider that while we are cutting. You might want to self-line your top, meaning that the outer layer and the lining are actually the same fabric. But today I'll be using different fabrics for my outer shell and my lining, which should hopefully make the whole thing super clear. So we have to cut the front on the fold, and we have to do that once for the lining and once for the outer shell. And the back we need to cut 2 or 1 pair, meaning that if you don't fold your fabric, when you cut, you have to just flip the pattern over. But I'll show you a super easy way to do that in a second, and also the same for the lining. And then the tie, we don't need to do it with and we only need to cut the tie out for the outer shell, but we need to cut 4 of this pattern piece. This is the fabric I've chosen to be the outer layer of my garment. It is such a beautiful embroidered cotton. I have already pre-washed and ironed this fabric, a super, super, super important step before you start sewing. I know it's really, really annoying. Trust me, it'll just really help the longevity of your garment. So I've got my washed and ironed fabric here with the right side facing up. So every fabric has a wrong side and a right side. And I'm going to get this selvage edge. So the selvage edge is the one with the little dots on it, and the frayed edge. There should be 2 of them, hopefully, all going well. We want to match up the selvage edges like this. So as we were talking about before, the front piece has to be cut on the fold. So this is our folded edge right here. And then I have my back piece, which I was also saying before needs 1 pair. Now, because our fabric is folded in half, we will actually end up with a pair anyway, so you don't need to flip the pattern. On each pattern piece, as you can see, we have an arrow. This is our straight grain line. So the straight grain should run parallel to the selvage. Another way to be fully sure is to grab a tape measure or a ruler and measure the distance between the straight grain line and the selvage in 2 different spots, and just make sure that they are the same, which in this case they are. So now that I'm happy with the placement of my pattern pieces, I'm going to grab a paperweight. I like to use my rose quartz that my sister gave to me. And I'm going to pin the pattern into the fabric. The other option for this step would be to mark around the pattern with tailor's chalk. Put a few pins in, making sure that it's still lying nice and flat. Okay, and now that we are pinned, we can cut. So I always like to take a moment before I cut into my fabric to make sure that I'm happy with how everything's been laid out, that my front is definitely on the fold, that I'm happy with how my fabric has been folded, and so on. Because it's really sad when you do cut into your fabric and then realize that you've made a big mistake. So I'm just going to really carefully cut along the edges of the pattern piece. Okay, and there it is all cut out. I'm going to keep the scraps for a potential future project, so I'll put those aside. One thing we have to do before removing the pattern pieces is just snipping into this little notch here. This notch is going to indicate where we attach our straps. So I like to snip into it so that I remember where it is for later. And now I just remove the pins. So that is my outer shell all cut up and ready to be sewn. And now I'm going to repeat that process, but with my lining fabric. I'm lining this top in a cotton voile, just because I thought that the embroidered cotton would be a little bit too thick double lined. So I've laid out all of my pattern pieces just like before, but this time I'm also cutting out the tie because I've decided that I want the tie in this fabric rather than the embroidered cotton. I need 4 of these. So because the fabric is doubled over, I'll cut it once and then I'll cut it again and I'll end up with 4 pieces. So I'm just gonna go ahead and repeat the process that I started before. And there we have it, all of our pieces cut out and ready to be sewn. We're gonna begin construction by grabbing your front piece, making sure that the right side is facing up. So this is the right side of my fabric and that is the wrong side. I'm then gonna grab one of my back pieces. This time though, I'm gonna make sure that the right side of the fabric is facing the right side here. So you'll hear me say this a lot in my tutorials, but always make sure that your right sides are touching each other. So I'm placing these back pieces onto the sides here, making sure that this little keyhole shape is in the center. And once I've placed them down, I'm going to put some pins in along the side. I always try and pin horizontally. That way I can actually sew over the pins. So as you can see here, I've done the same for my lining pieces. I've pinned down the side seams. So the same as what we did before on the outer shell. Now I'm going to go sew a straight stitch down this side and down this side and do the same on my lining pieces. And I'm going to leave a 1 centimeter seam allowance on the edge. I'll start with a back stitch, just to lock my seam in place. And I also end with a back stitch. The next step is to actually overlock the edges that we just sewed. If you don't have an overlocker, it's totally okay. You can just use a zigzag stitch along this edge instead, just to stop it from fraying. So we're gonna do that on all 4 edges of the seams that we just sewed. While you are at the overlocker, we are also going to overlock this edge, so the center back. For now, we're just gonna leave this curved edge unoverlocked, so just this straight bit down the bottom. And we're not sewing anything together, we're literally just gonna overlock that on its own, overlock this one on its own, and then repeat that step on the lining fabric. So the first thing I'm going to do is overlock the edge of the side seam that we just sewed, being really careful because the overlocker does have a blade. And then the other side seam edge. And like I said before, while I'm here, I'm just going to overlock this part of the center back seam, not the curved edge, just the straight edge, all on its own. I'm going to go repeat those steps on my lining fabric. I've just finished all of my overlocking. As you can see, I've overlocked the edge along where I've sewn my straight stitch on either side, and then I've overlocked these 2 pieces separately. Now that I've done my overlocking, you can open everything up like this. It's time for us to sew our center back seam. We're going to fold everything in half like this. So I folded that in half with, once again, the right sides facing, so the nice part of the seams touching each other. I'm lining up my overlocked edge that I've done on the center back. We're gonna sew a straight seam along that edge, but not along that curved edge. We're gonna leave that for later on. So put some pins in along the part that you're going to sew. And I want you to repeat that as well on the lining piece. So time to sew a straight stitch down that center back seam, making sure that we leave the curved edge unsewn for now. So lining up my edge with the 10mm mark. And I'm going to repeat that process on the lining. If you have an iron, we are going to relocate to the ironing board because it's time for us to press our seams. So we'll press the side seams down and flat. When you get to that center back seam, we are going to press it open. This is what we call an open seam. We do this to reduce bulk. For the next step, we are going to need our ties. Now, these are in 4 pieces, but we're actually needing to make 2 long ties. So the first step is to attach them together. So we're going to attach them here and here. And then I'm going to literally just fold that like so, put a pin in it, and then I'll do the same on the other tie and put a pin in. These are the 2 seams we need to sew from here to here, and we're leaving, instead of a 1 centimeter gap, we're actually going to leave 1/2 centimeter seam allowance. I'm going to sew along the edge, leaving a 5 millimeter seam allowance. So that's 1 join sewn. We are back at the ironing board again with our ties, and this time we are going to press these little seams flat and just quickly run the iron over each one. And I'm just going to neaten up these edges while I've got them laying flat. Now, the next step is that we need to press some creases into these ties before we sew them. If you have one of these little guys, it'll come in super handy. You just feed the fabric through. But to be totally honest, I'm not the hugest fan of these. I just find them to be like quite fiddly. So instead, I'm going to show you what you can do without one, because it isn't totally necessary. I literally, and just you have to be super careful not to burn your fingers when you do this, but I like to just fold the fabric in half like this and run the iron over the top. Someone might be looking at this going, oh my God, what are you doing? This is not how it's meant to be. This is how I do it. It's time to sew our ties. This is probably going to be the fiddliest part of this sewing tutorial. So you should have your piece creased like this, and I'm going to fold it in half so that these folded edges match up. The goal is to sew a stitch right along this edge where those folded edges match. I try to get pretty close. You can see in here that the needle is going to go in between where these 2 little bits meet. So I can see exactly where my stitch is going to line up. So I'm always just going to try and keep that piece, the tie, going as straight as possible. And there we have our first tie. That looks pretty decent. So I'm going to go ahead and finish the other one. And then if you'd like to, you can also run this under the iron another time so that it looks nice and flat. So we have our outer shell, our lining, and our ties, all of the main components. Now, honestly, we just have to put everything together. So at the moment, we have our outer shell with the right sides all touching each other, like the seams poking out. And it's the same with the lining. What we're going to do is we're going to get our lining and turn it around so that the right sides are facing up. We're not going to do that for the outer shell. We're actually just going to get this lining and stick it inside. So I'm going to line everything up so that all the nice seams are touching each other. The nice seams of the lining should be touching the nice seams of the outer shell. I'm not sure if that makes any sense, but I'll show you once I'm done. So there we go. Right now my lining is sitting inside the top. And if I have a little look, you can see that in here I've got a nice seam touching a nice seam. And that's the same in here. So the nice seams are touching each other. The nice seams is what I've coined them. That's my new term. First things first is I'm going to get these beautiful long ties that I've made. Can you see how these edges are not even? Just going to snip and snip so we've got a straight edge on the end of each one. Once again, we've got our right sides touching each other. I'm going to put my hand in between the outer shell and the lining in the back. And I'm going to find that little snip I made before on the outer shell. And I'm going to grab one of my ties and put it in between, once again, should be in between the lining and the outer shell of the back. So I found my little snip that I made earlier. I'm going to pin it to the outer shell. As you can see here, I've pinned the tie to the right side of the outer shell, and I'll do the same on the other side. So go in between the lining and the outer shell, take my tie with me. I'm going to find that little snip that I made before, the little notch, and pin the tie in. The next step is to put some pins along this back way. So we're going to start pinning the lining and the outer shell together now that we've got that tie in place. Pin, pin, pin I'll do the same on the other side. As you can see, I've pinned the lining to the outer shell, and I've also got my tie pinned in between them as well. Now I'm going to grab the whole thing and I'm going to flip her over. I'm going to put some pins in, continuing along, and I'm going to just follow along that armhole. There we go. And I'll do the same on this side. My pins are in along here, and then if I flip it, they're in along here. I'm going to take this over to the sewing machine now, and I'm going to sew a seam from here that goes all the way along here, and then it's going to continue onto the front all the way along there. So on one side, that should be one continuous seam, and on the other side, it's another continuous seam. Okay, let's do it. So following my pins, everything that I just pinned, this is the center back right now. Do my back stitch. 1 centimeter seam allowance always, unless I ever say anything else. And when we get to the end, we're just going to go all the way and do a little back stitch. And now we're going to do the other side. Okay, amazing. So as you can see, I've sewn my seam all the way along there and the same on the other side. Now I'm going to sew a seam along here, but I need to leave a gap. I need to leave a gap from the edge of the seam we've just sewn to 1 centimeter in. I have to start my seam where this pin starts, and then I need to leave a gap on the other side here as well. So the way I'm going to remind myself with that is I'm going to use these little pins with little colors on the end, on those ends. So I'll know when I get to it that I need to stop there. So we're still going to leave our seam allowance along this edge like we normally do, but making sure that yes, there's a gap that's left in here, no sewing there. Now I'm just going to flip everything over. While we are at it, we're also going to sew a seam along this keyhole detail. But, another but, we're going to be using our colored pins again because you guessed it, we're going to leave another gap from the seam that we just sewed to again 1 centimeter in. We're going to leave a gap. So our next seam is going to start there, and then the same is going to finish on the other side. So we're going to go all the way down here. We're going to follow this beautiful curve around and then back up, starting and finishing at these pins. I'm going to put a few more pins in so that my fabric doesn't slide around. So just to remind you, we're going to leave a little gap here, starting at the colored pin, sewing all the way along till we get to the other colored pin and doing our back stitch, leaving a gap there. We're going to start at this purple pin, do a back stitch, go all the way around this curve, and then do another back stitch when we get to our other colored pin. So that means that we'll leave a little gap of no sewing in here and in here. And then when I get to the next colored pin, I'll do my back stitch. Okay, next. So I'm going to start on this edge at the purple pin. Okay, I have to go around my curve. You might have to do some little pivots to get around these corners. I've just got my top here, it's upside down. As you can see, there's my beautiful seams going along here and my gaps that I had to leave. I'm just gonna get either my shears, or you could actually use some snips if you want to be a little bit more careful. We are going to go into this armhole curve and just snip all the way around on the seam allowance only. Don't let yourself get too close to that seam. Beautiful, just in the curves. And then I've just flipped everything over. We're also just going to do this keyhole curve just around the bottom of that curve. We're just going to snip, but that's what that should look like once it's done, all snipped in the curve, and then obviously the same on the armholes. Once you've done your little snips into the armholes and the keyhole, we're going to finally turn everything around the right way. So go inside the lining and the outer shell and pull everything around the right way. So this is what it should look like. What I like to do to poke out these corners, I use these. These could be maybe my favorite sewing tool. And I like to use them to just poke into the corners and get everything looking nice and crisp and sharp. We also want to poke into the corners of the back. Beautiful. And just once again, we do have a hole there, so I like to just poke my tweezers in, make sure everything's sitting nice in that hole. I've got the back of my garment here ready to be ironed. Before I even iron, I just make sure I like how it's sitting, and then I just go in. We want to make sure it's flat because we're about to sew our casing seam. And if it's not sitting nicely, you're going to make it sit that way permanently. These steps, I know they're annoying, but they're what make the garment look the most professional and the most well finished. Now that we've ironed, it's time for us to make our casing. And we're just going to pin again along that back seam here. And then we're going to follow it around. So just like what we did before, actually, up the armhole and all the way to this edge here. We don't need to leave any gaps this time. We're just going to pin from this edge all the way to this edge. And the same, obviously, on the other side. So now that my pins are in, we are going to sew our casing seam. We're going to go in about 1 centimeter from this edge, starting where we've left this first hole, sewing all the way along 1 centimeter from the edge, all the way along to here, and back stitch there. And then we'll obviously do the same on the other side. Start with my back stitch. When you get to the tie, just make sure that it's not accidentally tucked under. You don't want to accidentally sew it down. So I just grab mine, pull it to the side. I'm going to go and repeat that on the other side. Okay, amazing. The casing is all done. So if everything is all gone to plan, we should have a casing that has a hole there, a hole in there, a hole in here, and then the same on this side. So I'm gonna go and get my safety pin, grab this strap, and put it right on the end. This is one of those things that no matter how many times you do it, you always end up with a twisted strap. But the way I like to do it is I lie it flat like this. So I know that I want it to go like that over my shoulder, right? And then I go in here. You kind of have to, sometimes you'll find this is a bit of trial and error to get it without twisting, but I think I got it right. So then I'm just feeding the safety pin through the casing. Okay, so you keep threading it through until you get back out the other end. So I'll take my safety pin off and now go ahead and do the other side. Okay, if you have gotten this far, well done. So that's the front of the top. I've kind of gathered mine, and then the back of it, you can actually tie a little bow. With the edges of these, you can either fold and sew them down. Today, I'm actually just going to do a little knot. Okay guys, we have one step left. We just have to hem the top. So I actually recommend that in this moment you go try it on, make sure you're cool with the length. If it's like way too long for you, you can do a bigger hem than what we are about to do. But basically you're only going to lose 2 centimeters with our hem. So I wouldn't recommend cutting anything off or anything like that. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna just flick the outer shell away for a moment and iron our hem for the lining first. I am going to iron down a 1 centimeter all the way around the hem, and then we're going to fold in 1 centimeter again and go all the way around. And once you've finished ironing the lining hem, we're just going to repeat that same step on the outer shell. So I've just flipped my garment inside out, fold the lining back, and then towards the wrong side of the outer shell, I'm gonna do my 1 centimeter and then 1 centimeter again, all the way around. And now we are going to sew our hem. Now, if you would like to, you can go all the way along those edges that we just ironed with a pin. If you feel confident though, you can just go straight in without pins. And we are basically wanting to sew right along this folded edge, kind of just like what we did with the tie before. Go right in next to where my needle is. And so right along that edge. Amazing. Snipping off all of your threads always. And then I'm just going to repeat that process on the outer shell. Guys, you are done. Well done. You made it to the end. This is the Iris Drawstring Camisole. I love her. I'm obsessed with her. I'm so excited about having made it in an embroidered cotton because I am the biggest fan of embroidered cottons. I love that it's kind of adjustable and you can rouge it up and down as much as you like. Same with the back of it. You can have the back super gathered or a little less. It is really such a great sewing project and I hope that you learned a lot from this and that it was clear and concise. But if you're having any troubles with the tutorial, please let me know and I can respond to you in the comments, even with some videos if you need. Thank you so much for coming along on my very first seam circle tutorial. I hope to do many, many more of these and I'm so excited to have you here. Mwah.